As we say goodbye to 2014, we're going to press the rewind button. Well, during the next 2 hours, we'll explore the events, issues, and people that have changed our world over the past 12 months. So join us for this very special edition of Arise Review. Rewind 2014 begins right now. Hello, I'm Julian Phillips. We are honored to have with us for this first hour a man who not only witnessed history, he helped shape it. Dr. Robert Gates served as U.S. Secretary of Defense from 2006 till July of 2011 in the administrations of George W. Bush as well as Barack Obama. Now, he is the only Secretary of Defense in American history to be asked to remain in office by a newly elected president. Dr. Gates has also served as director of the CIA and advised both Democratic and Republican presidents over the decades. And along the way, he held the office of university president at Texas A&M and is currently chancellor of the College of William and Mary. His book, Duty, Memoirs of a Secretary at War, was released earlier this year and became a bestseller. Welcome to Arise Review, Dr. Gates.
Thank you. Hello.
Okay. Well, there's so much to talk about in this hour, and since you've long been an expert on the former Soviet Union and on Russia, especially Russia under Vladimir Putin, let's start with a look back at the events that unfolded in Ukraine this past year. After Ukraine's President Viktor Yanukovych bowed to Russian pressure to reject economic ties with the West, demonstrations broke out. Protesters wanted the 2004 constitution suspended by Yanukovych reinstated. Yanukovych was forced to flee. An interim government was set up, claiming the need to protect ethnic Russians. President Putin annexed Crimea in March. Charging the move violated the sovereignty of Ukraine, the U.S. led the charge to impose sanctions against Russia. Fighting spread to eastern Ukraine after pro-Russian militants seized government buildings. Russia denied it was behind the insurrection.
Урочисто присягаю на вірність Україні.
In June, Petro Poroshenko was sworn in as president.
The results of the election bring the firm victory of all democratic, pro-European, pro-Ukrainian forces.
The victory is coming at a high cost. Despite numerous attempts at ceasefires, almost 5,000 have died and about 1 million people have been displaced. As Putin continues to dig in his heels, the West continues to add pressure. The tightening sanctions and the fall in the price of oil are wrecking the Russian economy. But still, Crimea remains under the control of Russia. Eastern Ukraine is still being contested, and Putin's becoming increasingly pugnacious. Well, Dr. Gates, with your experience dealing with Putin through the years, are you surprised by his actions in the Ukraine?
No, I don't think so. I think Putin really has two objectives here. One is personal on his part, and one is historical. The personal one is, I think he has come to see it as a historical mission for him personally to protect the Russians that were left behind when the Soviet Union collapsed. The 25 million Russians who ended up in newly independent states, and he is determined to ensure that they have the right to use their language, to observe their Russian Orthodox faith, and frankly, to look to Russia for protection. So that's a historical mission he has taken on. I think the other mission is as old as the Russian Empire itself, and that is to reconstitute a buffer of friendly states on the periphery of Russia that look to Moscow economically, politically, and for security. And he is trying to do this. Ukraine is central to both of those missions. There are probably more Russians living in eastern Ukraine than in any of the other newly independent states after the collapse of the Soviets. So I think that his efforts in Ukraine really are the centerpiece. Just a little bit of history. The Russian Empire has its roots in Ukraine, in Kiev, over 1,000 years ago. So I think there's an emotional and historical tie there, as well as power politics.
As a fact, Mr. Gates, you had mentioned that Putin felt that the end of the Soviet Union was the worst geopolitical event of the 20th century. So I think that sums it up, as you have in your book there, quite aptly here. Now, you wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal arguing for a long-term strategy against Russia. How can the U.S. and its allies counter Putin's influence in Eastern Europe as well as Central Asia, in your opinion?
I think it has several parts. One of the things that was pretty clear when I became Secretary of Defense was that the Russians had a pretty aggressive covert operation in a number of the Central Asian states, as an example, to foster anti-Americanism, anti-Europeanism, to try and persuade those states, the peoples of those states, that Westerners were hostile and that they should look to Russia. And so my view from the very beginning when I became Secretary was that the U.S. ought to be countering that propaganda campaign with our own efforts in those states. I think that there are other aspects to it. I think that the actions that have been taken to strengthen NATO in Eastern Europe, particularly in Poland and the Baltic states, are the right moves. My own view is that we probably ought to have some kind of a rotational U.S. force in Poland and the Baltic states to make it clear to Putin that any military action against those states would bring a real crisis with the United States. But I also think that we need an economic strategy. The Baltic states are heavily independent economically on Russia, and should Russia decide to turn the screws on them, they would be in real trouble. So I think that the EU, NATO, the U.S. Ought to work together to create some kind of an economic safety net for the three Baltic states. So I think it's a combination of political influence, military strength, and economic cooperation and support to give those countries the confidence that they can withstand pressures from Russia.
Sure, Dr. Gates, I want to focus right now on the economy, as a matter of fact. Here, the ruble, as you know, is crashing, and Russia's economy, by many accounts, is heading into a recession. Is this the new diplomacy by other means, as some experts are stating?
I think that there was some question whether sanctions would have a real impact on Russia. I think what we've seen in recent months is that the combination of limits, particularly on the banks and on transfer of technology, for example, in the oil and gas industry and so on, have had an impact. And then it's been significantly accelerated, it seems to me, by the very significant fall in the price of oil. As I understand it, the Russian budget was constructed on the basis of about $100 to $103 per barrel oil. And with oil now at around $60, that's a huge hit. Putin seems confident that he can ride this out, that this is a year or two of hard going for Russia, and he's trying to portray it to the Russian people that they're going to have to put up with these sacrifices, that this is all a plot by the West to weaken Russia, as he puts it, to take away their claws and their teeth. And so I think he's going to play this nationalist card in terms of telling the Russians, this is why you have to sacrifice, this is why you have to do without, and we'll get through this, and it'll take a couple of years.
You know, Dr. Gates, looking at Ukraine, I've got to ask, do you think that we've written off Crimea at this point, totally?
Well, I think that the West, I think that, let me put it this way, I don't think Putin is prepared to give up Crimea at all. Crimea was part of Russia for a very long time, long before the Soviet Union was created. It has their only Navy base on the Black Sea. So I think there's virtually no chance that Putin is going to give up on Crimea. I think that the issue in question is just how aggressive he intends to be in eastern Ukraine itself. Does he want to establish a land bridge to Crimea to ensure that Russia has access by land to that area? And does he want eastern Ukraine to be autonomous? Does he want it to be an independent state, this Novorossiya that he has talked about, this new Russia, trying to put an ideological, historical underpinning that this always has been Russian territory or something like that? But I think that he is determined that eastern Ukraine will have to look to Russia and be part of that buffer that I talked about earlier. And how far he's prepared to go to ensure that, I think, remains to be seen.
Okay, Dr. Gates, stay with us here. Of course,